that you have acted as a forensic consultant?
So I've been licensed since 1989. I've worked as a forensic consultant and psychologist since 1993. I've testified in various cases dealing with criminal responsibility for murder trials, sexual offenses, competency to stand trial, mitigation cases, probate matters, matters of dangerousness, prediction of dangerousness. I'm a psychologist for the DEA, the Drug Enforcement Administration, where I deal with critical incidents that occur from agents engaged in various violent episodes. I was a forensic psychologist and clinical psychologist for the State Department, and I was in Afghanistan from late 2007, November 2007 to February 2011 for a period of 38 months, doing debriefings of traumatic events that have taken place, doing trainings, engaged with various governmental and federal agencies, and helping with debriefings as well.
And have you also been involved for about 4 or 5 years, actually, with the Department of State, Department of Defense?
Yes.
And what was the nature of that?
In those cases, I've done fitness for duty for evaluations of individuals who serve in the capacity of security personnel at various embassies throughout the world.
And for example, can you tell us where you actually served in that capacity in other countries?
I was in
that were involved in wartime?
Yes, I was in Cambodia early on 2 separate occasions, part of 2004, part of 2005. And then, as mentioned earlier, I was in Afghanistan. I also did some debriefings in Thailand, in Bangkok at the U.S. Embassy there.
And in the course of your experience working for the Department of State and all the various other law enforcement agencies that you described as well, do you have a private practice as well?
Yes, I do.
Have you focused on things such as stress control, post-traumatic stress disorder, battlefield chaos, for example, things of that nature?
Yes.
Have you focused in your studies or in your involvement as a psychologist with the concept of depression?
Yes.
Anxiety?
Yes.
And without going into it, have you also published hundreds of articles or as far as psychological matters that you are involved?
I have published some, but not many.
How about peer review articles?
I did not.
Now, in this case, have you had a chance or occasion to review the emergence of what we refer to as the coronavirus disease?
Yes.
When did the coronavirus disease occur in the spring of the world?
I believe the onset occurred in early 2020. There's some questions and debates about whether it was earlier than that in various parts of the world, but in the United States it affected and impacted most people here in the early parts of 2020.
And in your opinion, sir, have you had occasion to review other articles, peer review articles, statistical analyses as it relates to the escalation of the pandemic into a global health crisis?
Yes.
Can you tell us on the basis that what you actually reviewed as far as other peer review articles?
I reviewed many of the articles that were published by the World Health Organization, through the UN, through the CDC, Centers for Disease Control's various prestigious journals in the United States and worldwide, namely New England Journal of Medicine, and there have been articles published through the VA where a meta-analysis was done, which is a combining of other journal articles that were written discussing these themes and topics of the psychological sequelae and consequences of the worldwide pandemic. And the meaningfulness of a meta-analysis in a research article is that it makes the sample size a lot larger. So instead of having a sample size that could be 30 or 40 people, the meta-analysis has samples of 4,000 patients. So the statistical significance is more meaningful with a larger size in the research population.
Now, as it relates to adverse psychological effects of the pandemic, is it your understanding that the technique or theory has been tested by individuals in your field?
Yes.
And in what what capacity have they been tested?
They've been tested using standard psychological instruments that measure things like depression, anxiety, PTSD, a post-traumatic stress disorder on different levels, whether it's acute, chronic, or complex.
Now, as it relates to the concerns, if you will, that an individual had as a result of this overwhelming pandemic, there are two factors, anxiety and fear.
Yes.
You need to explain that, sir. What is passive anxiety? What is pervasive anxiety? And what, if any, effect does that have on a person's depression?
Well, so everyone experiences anxiety. It's part of normal living. The issue from a psychological point of view and a mental health issue is when anxiety becomes elevated to the point where people cannot function in their normal way of dealing with the world on an everyday basis. So when they face challenges and their anxiety is elevated, they end up often having problems figuring things out. There is a cognitive diminishment in.
What does that mean?
It means they can't think straight. People forget things. They have a reduction in their ability to problem solve. Pervasive anxiety is essentially overwhelming anxiety, and that can sometimes immobilize a person where they can't do their work, they can't work at home, they can't go to school. They have problems doing the most simple things, going to the market, trying to make decisions about what food to buy. And the element of anxiety from a treatment point of view has always been easier to manage when there's engagement with other people, because the human condition is a social condition. People are in groups. Healthy people have friends. Healthy resolution for anxiety and depression often requires people to gather with each other. So this becomes particularly problematic when people had to shelter in place and be isolated. Shelter in place means you stay home, you do not go out, you do not subject yourself to the possibility of being infected by someone who may be a carrier of any disease. Obviously, COVID-19 would be what we're referring to, and you don't expose others in case you are asymptomatic, though positive for the disorder.
Now, in your studies or in your evaluation of the effect of the pandemic on human beings, is fear a major factor?
Yes.
Is that a central mediator of the psychological distress?
Yes.
What does that mean?
What it means is that fear is always the cornerstone of anxiety, because anxiety is often about what is going to be happening around the corner. It's future-oriented. Although people are anxious in the moment, if you speak to people who have panic attacks and significant anxiety, it's about what's going to happen next. So whether you're on an airplane and the flight is fine, it's not the anxious person who worries about what's going on now, it's they worry about what's going to happen the next minute or the next hour. So fear becomes the cornerstone because it's all anticipatory, it's all future related. And that's why when you have a pandemic where the world's leading experts are at a loss to provide guidance and therefore psychological comfort and support for the citizens of the world, it only rotates the dial of that anxiety measure and people become extremely anxious. And we're not referring to just simply people who have a pre-existing mental health disorder of some type of anxiety disorder, but normal people who have never been exposed to these things before, and normal people who are engaged in work and social opportunities where they've always been productive, had meaningfulness, had what we call hope, the triad of hopefulness, hopefulness about the world, hopefulness about themselves, and hopefulness about the world around them and their future. And when you are struggling to make sense of things and you're isolated, it has a synergistic effect where you become far more anxious than you've ever been. And these are for people who generally don't have a great deal of anxiety. That's the hard part.
Now, in your report, for example, on page 2 of your report, you're making reference to the research as it relates to fear and leading to anxiety, is that correct?
Yes.
You cited a study that was performed, looks as though it was March of 2025, actually dealing with the emotional, behavioral, and psychological impact of COVID-19. Is that correct?
Correct.
Did that study have a statistical analysis of the percentage of people in the population of the United States of America reporting anxiety?
Yes, it did.
What is the percentage that they determined that to be?
That was 30.9%, almost 31%.
Now, as it relates to your report, and you're making reference to statistical analyses, for example, is there a known potential error rate that these citations can be subjected to?
Yes.
What is that?
So the issue of error rate is about when implementing testing, what are the consequences of what we call false positives and false negatives. So a false positive is a test where someone scores as if they are having a issue, let's say a health issue, when in fact they don't. A false negative is a test result where someone is testing clean, let's say for a disease or for a virus of some sort, when in fact they are in fact carrying it. The most classic example is the issue of the lie detector, which has a false positive rate of, let's say, roughly 20%. So in other words, people who take a lie detector test appear to be deceptive when in fact they are not. They're just highly anxious. Conversely, people who will seemingly pass a lie detector or a polygraph test appear to be telling the truth when in fact they are not. So those types of error rates are significant because we don't rely on error rates that are very high because they can be misleading and actually inaccurate.
You also make reference to the fact the COVID-19 pandemic, in fact, impacted society significantly as it relates to sadness, with a specific association of isolation leading to surge in depressive symptoms as well as anxiety. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Now, did that also make reference to a statistical analysis of the adults in the United States of America that were reporting these depressive symptoms as a result of the sadness and isolation caused
Yes.
by the pandemic?
That's correct.
And what was, as it relates to general adults in the United States, general population as it relates to lockdown?
So we found that there was a 25% increase in those issues for people in the general population in the United States.
How about suicide? Was there a study or any indications in the studies that suicide spiked during the course of the pandemic?
Yes, there was.
And
There
why
was.
is that?
Pardon me?
Why is that?
Well, people who are suicidal often will feel they have no hope and they have nothing to live for. And therefore, in their opinion, a rational way to solve the pain and to reduce the pain is to hurt themselves and to kill themselves. And when you have a disorder or have great worries about having a particular disorder where you feel there's no hope for you, you sometimes think about suicide and have suicide ideations, and then sometimes you act on that.
And you indicate that significant percentage of individuals reported negative shifts in their outlook on life, expressing a diminished hope in the future. Is that correct?
Yes.
You make reference in the studies to the PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder. Is that correct?
That's correct.
Can you tell us what impact, in your opinion, in the studies that you were able to access in your field, that post-traumatic stress was an offshoot, if you will, of the anxiety and the depression and the isolation caused individuals from the pandemic?
So the baseline for individuals with PTSD is roughly 6 or 7%, depending on the sample size you look at. And it went up to 50% of people being so impaired that they met the what's called the DSM-5-TR, the Diagnostic Statistical Manual Text Revision 5th edition, which is a code book for assessing mental health issues, and it went up to as high as 50%.
You also made reference to the fact of the impact of social isolation in reduced social support on a human being as a result of the pandemic. What does that mean? What were your results?
The simple definition is that the more you isolate yourself from others, the more difficult it is to function in the world around you. And you habituate or you get used to being isolated. So every day becomes the same. You lose contact with people. People lose contact with you. You become impaired and depressed and unable to function, and you don't have what we call expectancy, the goal to be able to be productive and to do things. So it's a downward spiral of depression and anxiety and fear.
Now, can you tell us, Hunter, whether or not what you've been testifying to and what you researched has been subjected to publication and peer review?
Oh, yes, it has been.
And basically, what is publication and peer review?
Publication peer review is that a journal will accept the presentation of your facts and research, and they look at the methodology involved, and they look at the sample size, and they do a assessment of a qualitative review, meaning do you meet the criteria for good research, and sometimes a quantitative review too, which is the sample size that's large enough. And a peer review is when research articles are shared to other independent examiners who don't know who else has the research articles, and they comment on them, and they make either corrections, or they reject them, or they accept them.
You also made reference to COVID-19's extreme demands on individuals, causing what is referred to as a fight or flight freeze and the erosion of rational choice. What is that?
So fight or flight is a phenomenon that often occurs in a physiological way. And the best way to describe that is when someone, a normal, everyday, average person, is confronted with either a horrific man-made experience, like a bank robbery, let's say, or car accident, or a natural disaster like a hurricane, or, if you will, maybe a COVID outbreak. And they go into a series of powerful physiological responses. And initially what happens is your brain interprets that information and makes the assessment that this is very dangerous. You need to leave. You need to leave now. And there's a physiological response, a adrenaline shunt. You have excessive powerful energy where you can, although you may have been tired, all of a sudden you have the capacity to get up, to run far distances, to lift heavy weights if something's blocking you to get out of the way, and then you leave the site where you view that you are at risk and you flee. That's the flight part.
As it relates to concepts of hyperarousal and intense fear that was created by the pandemic, is it your opinion that it generates impairment of cognitive functions, leading to impulsive and irrational decision-making?
Yes, it does. So impulsive irrational decision-making is exactly what it sounds like. You make a decision that's sort of a knee-jerk response. We sometimes look at that as a visceral response, no thinking, just acting. If someone touches a hot stove top, for example, a small child who's told by their parent, please don't do that, you'll hurt yourself.
The COVID-19 pandemic led to increased fear, depression, and anxiety, especially in those individuals displaced from their homes.
Yes.
Tell us about that.
Well, the outcome, which I personally am very aware of because I spend a lot of time going to psychiatric hospitals to do evaluations, were so profound that there were not enough beds in the Commonwealth. Now, fair enough to say that there is a shortage to begin with, but there was an overwhelming shortage of beds in the Commonwealth to take on patients who needed to be hospitalized to become stable. And that's just not in Massachusetts. That's essentially throughout the United States and I believe all over the world, where there were so many impaired individuals who did not know what to do that they needed to go to receive treatment, and the treatment systems were flooded with not just ill people, but people who had psychiatric emergencies.
Now, in the course of your review, sir, have you determined whether or not your opinion, as well as that of the others in the learned treatises that you reviewed, has attracted widespread acceptance within a relevant scientific community.
Yes,
Tell us about that.
it has. Well, by and large, in the world we were living in then, although it's not that long ago, it feels like for many people so far back, there were many conferences, all remote, symposium, all remote, and meetings of clinicians who work for different agencies getting together to brainstorm on trying to help people. And therein lies some of the changes that we see today in 2025, where telehealth became acceptable, reimbursable from insurance companies, which wasn't the case before, and is a standard way of doing business. And I know as a person who deals with crises, I was often on Zoom meetings. In one case, when I was in Alexandria, Virginia, dealing with HHS, where there was a death of 2 agents, we had 700 agents on Zoom throughout the United States dealing with the consequences of their own loss from their colleagues, but more importantly, on how they were coping. And they were not doing well. We had upticks in people, and these are highly trained agents who felt suicidal, who were able to get treatment, turned in their weapons for a short period of time, and those are people who are at a high level of functioning because they get vetted and they get tested and they get assessed every which way. So we did see that throughout the United States, that many people just could not cope with the changes in the world around them. Things weren't getting better fast enough, and hospitals were flooded with patients, and people were home and fearful.
Now, your conclusion would be that it's crucial to acknowledge the profound psychological suffering endured by individuals throughout this pandemic. Is that correct?
That's correct.
And would you agree, or is it a matter of your review of the peer review articles and your own opinion that there was indeed a significant mental health crisis that was triggered by the COVID-19 demands?
I do agree with that, yes.
Can inquire.
Good morning, Dr. Zerizel. Have you
Good morning,
ever
Attorney.
testified on this topic before?
Not in court, no.
When you say not in court, what do you mean?
I'm sorry, yeah, that's misleading, I'm sorry. No, I have not testified. I've spoken about it in conferences, but not testified on it.
Okay, what conferences have you spoken about this?
With the DEA and with HHS.
And when you spoke at those conferences, were you speaking about the collective experience of psychological distress that people experienced as a result of the pandemic?
Yes, in part, but there were also the practical applications of what to do now going forward, helping agents and agents' families going forward, and it would spread to other areas and other arenas of discord for many of the agents. So how to deal with the anger and frustration that they had, how to deal with parenting of an adolescent who was struggling themselves. So it affected the family from the parents down to the children, and extended beyond not just the stressors, but how to cope with it. And it was oriented not to simply acknowledge the problems that people were having, but to develop some strategies for people to get healthy and to get better.
And this article, the conclusions in this article are really about the need for continued treatment, intervention, and support for communities as a result of the pandemic. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay. And this article has a lot of research. In the first couple of pages, your citations are to recent research. Is that fair to say?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. And is this article published in any way?
No, it's not yet, no.
When did you finish this?
A few weeks ago.
A few weeks ago.
Yes.
Okay. And have you submitted it to any peer-reviewed journals yet?
I have not.
Are you still revising it?
Well, I don't know if I am, but I might be.
Might you still revise?
I might, yes.
Okay. And the paragraph or the chapter on fight or flight, that's 9, is that fair to say?
Yes.
And all of your citations in that section on fight or flight are from older research, that's fair to say, right?
That's correct, yes.
Okay. Do you have current support for your statement that the pandemic's confluence of life threats, economic stability, and social isolation created an environment ripe for activating fight, flight, or freeze responses, fundamentally altering behavioral and psychological states?
I don't cite a specific research article because that's a difficult topic to pin down, because fight or flight becomes sometimes a idiosyncratic interpretation. So fight or flight for one person may not be exactly the same for another person. And you need a large sample to make it valid, and I not researched that part.
All right. So the theory that you're outlining in Section 9 is widely accepted regarding what our bodies do when confronted with some sort of a threat or danger, right?
Yes, that's not debatable. It's a physiological outcome.
All right.
That's correct.
But what I'm asking about is the application to COVID-19. Is there any peer-reviewed research that you're aware of regarding that specific application of COVID-19 and fight or flight?
No.
Have you ever met with Dr. Tuerk?
Yes.
Could we approach? There's a minute, please.
Yes.
Do you have a time period that you would consider I'm struggling for the right word, but does the literature contemplate a specific time period for the duration of the pandemic?
I'm not really sure I understand the question, because
In terms of years, or days, or months, or what time period is the pandemic?
well, it's sort of like the 5 blind men and the elephant. It depends where you are at the time. So the time period has shifted in terms of accuracy of when it first started, depending where one is in the world.
So I don't mean from a medical perspective
Okay.
about when people were getting sick. What I'm asking for is about the literature that you're talking about, the collective stress or anxiety. What's the time period for that?
I can't answer that question because there are ebbs and flows with outbreaks with COVID-19. Currently, there's an increase. So it's still technically a major problem. I'm not sure whether it's certainly not as bad as it had been, but there was a period of time where you did not need to demonstrate WHO vaccination cards if you were to travel. Some countries now require that. Some countries have quarantines. So I can't really answer the question because it's still going on.
Okay, I want to make sure you're understanding my question. My question isn't about the physiological, medical COVID pandemic itself. I'm talking about the mental health crisis that you're describing. Is that still continuing?
It is still continuing because I go to hospitals every week and I hear about it every single week. And I get sometimes tested, depending where you go, sometimes wearing a mask. It's still going on.
All right.
Some places worse than ever. Some are shut down. Some units are shut down. It's still a crisis.
So in your opinion, the phenomenon that you're describing and the increase in psychological distress is continuing till today?
Yes.
All right, no further questions.
That's all I have.
Okay, you may step down.
Thank you, Your Honor.
Doug? So we'll conclude the proffer, Your Honor.